Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Jeffrey and this is AutoAlchemy, the intersection between typology and self-growth. And today I'm going to be doing a quick compare and contrast of the INFP and the INFJ. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can these types really be that different? Is it even worth making a video about them? I mean, INF blank. Theoretically, they should be pretty similar. So let's just jump into looking at the differences between these two types. As you can see here, the INFP has long, flowing hair, somewhat yellow, slightly greenish tint to it. She likes to hold flowers. She's surrounded by butterflies, or maybe those are angels. I don't know. This imagery is a little on the abstract side. And then as for the INFJ, this guy is basically a wizard. Also notice INFPs are female and INFJs are male. It's kind of like cats and dogs in that way. By the way, if you guys want to support my channel and get early access to my videos as well as some bonus content, please feel free to check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. For only $7 a month, you can access things like my hour-long analysis of the conversation between Michaela Peterson and JP Sears, and you'll find other behind-the-scenes goodies as time goes on. All right, but let's do a serious compare and contrast now, because I can understand why people out there might be confused. They might think they're an INFJ, but maybe there's a little inkling of doubt. So it's definitely worth diving into the real nitty-gritty here. And I just want to be the person who's swinging the sword of clarity to cut through the tangle of nebulousness. Heck yeah, I should write that down. That's pretty good. By the way, this analysis is going to be done within the framework of the objective personality system. At this point, it's kind of my preferred sandbox for thinking about typology. So yeah, one thing that I was kind of trying to point out earlier is that it's understandable if you would think these two types are similar. After all, in the 4-letter code, there's really only one letter different between the two of them. However, that's a little bit of a red herring, because the 4-letter code is really just a signpost pointing to a deeper configuration of psychological preferences and cognitive structures. And so when we really want to think about similarities and differences, we're going to be hunting for those deeper layers and deeper levels of the psyche. And that's really going to help you make sense of what's the most essential thing about being an INFP and what's essential about being an INFJ. And despite those surface level similarities, INFPs and INFJs really are quite different. They actually have almost nothing in common when you begin to look under the hood for those deeper levels. Essentially, the only real similarity that you can find between the two is that they're both NF types. So they're both hippies in a manner of speaking, which is why we had the caricature of the flower child and the caricature of the wizard. So NF types generally are going to have a preference for abstract overviewing compared to getting lost in the nitty-gritty of the sensory data. And they're also going to have a focus on what matters from a value-oriented perspective, instead of getting too fixated on working through things in a logical fashion. However, even that similarity is only half true thanks to the existence of jumper types. So in the objective personality system, you're actually going to find certain INFJs who have a preference for NITI instead of NIFE, and you're also going to find INFPs who have a preference for FISI instead of FINE. So both of those types are going to be lead sleep, and therefore they're going to have that particular part of their animal configuration in common. So they're both going to be doubling up on their introverted functions, but then that similarity is kind of undermined by the fact that this particular INFP is going to be more SF-like, and that particular INFJ is going to be more of an NT-flavored INFJ. So it's like you can't win no matter what. You find a similarity here, but it creates a difference over there. But speaking of differences, let's look at the more general features of these personality types and try to suss out what those differences are. So the first big difference is that INFPs are deciders while INFJs are observers. So a decider, or single decider to be more technically accurate, is someone who has their two observing functions or perceiving functions in the middle of their cognitive stack. That means they're going to be leading with a thinking function or a feeling function. And ultimately what that means is that they're going to be lopsided when it comes to thinking versus feeling. They're going to be really repressing that fourth function. And as a result, these functions also get kind of tied up in the human needs. So the human need of identity versus connection with the tribe is going to be tied up with the thinking and feeling functions. And as a result, you might go all in on your identity and therefore alienate the tribe, or you might go all in on appeasing the tribe and therefore become alienated from yourself and your values. Deciders really get tripped up on that tension between thinking and feeling, and that tension between me and them. Who is the hero? Who is the villain? That sort of thing. Now, as for the INFJ, they're going to be a single observer, and that means they're actually going to be relatively balanced in this area. They're not going to have major people problems in that particular way. They're human beings. They're going to have some, as everyone does, but it's not going to be the real heart of their issues in life. They're actually going to get tripped up on perception, observation, because they're leading with this cyclops of an intuition function, which is something that I can relate to. They're going to be completely neglecting the sensory data of reality, which means they might be in for a rude awakening. They might go all in on some sort of intuitive concept or give themselves to some abstract pattern that they use to frame their approach to reality, only to realize that reality and the picture that they have in their head, they ain't working together. They're going to clash. And so that's going to be the issue for the INFJ. It's a problem of hidden information and perception. Another big difference between these two types is that they have inverted decider axes. So INFPs are going to be on the introverted feeling, extroverted thinking axis, and INFJs are going to be on the introverted thinking, extroverted feeling axis. And what that means is for INFPs, values and thinking about emotions, these things are going to be very personal. They're going to be very subjective, and they're going to perceive thinking in a more collective, shared way. Now, they're not always going to like participating in that thinking process. In fact, in my recent video about JP Sears, he is a lead FI. He's actually an ISFP, and you can see how his repression of his thinking function bubbles up in a negative way from the unconscious, and he ends up getting really weird around this idea of groupthink, propaganda. He sees the collective as a negative home for the thinking function. People are negatively aligned in a collective way in their thought, and that's not a good thing for the INFP, because when people are aligned in that way, it might end up crushing your subjective values. So that's one thing about INFPs. And then with the INFJs, the logic is going to be personal, it's going to be subjective, and the values are going to be more collective. This is sort of the deeper mechanism underlying the stereotype of INFJs being so empathetic and so giving. They are, in fact, tracking values on a spectrum. They are trying to see other people for what their values are, what their emotional valences are. Meanwhile, the INFJ, in their more subjective moments, they're going to be using their introverted thinking to think through problems. They're going to be figuring things out in a very introverted thinking way, tucked away, and they're working on some sort of grand theory of everything. And so the final big difference that I want to talk about is that these two types have inverted observer axes. So the INFP is going to have introverted sensing and extroverted intuition, and the INFJ is going to have introverted intuition and extroverted sensing. So for INFPs, the sensory realm is going to be more personal. It is going to be a little more subjective. There may be a sense of familiarity or a sense of nostalgia attached to real things and real happenings, memories from the past. This is my life, this is my story, these are my little SI data points, and they're mine, they're personal to me, and that way they are connected in some sense to my introverted feeling. That's going to be even more true for those INFPs who have high sleep, the animal that consists of those two functions. And with the sensory realm being so subjective and personal for them, that means that the abstract realm of patterns and connections is going to be a little less personal. They're going to jump from framework to framework, concept to concept, metaphor to metaphor in a very promiscuous way. That's one reason why I personally think that extroverted intuition works so well in stand-up comedy. These comedians are seeing something funny out there and it reminds them of this thing, and they can kind of spitball on this chain of this resembles this, reminds me of this, it's like this. These are the abstract connections that extroverted intuition often likes to play with, and sometimes that can be sort of a funny emotional connection being made, or it can be a more serious logical NTP. Oh, this is like this, which means that it slots here into my framework, and this is, yeah, just to give you a sense of the different flavors of these functions. And so yeah, the INFJs do not really like that abstract promiscuity as much. Instead, they like abstract simplicity, narrowing, control. They're more likely to see sensory data as impersonal. Sensory reality is this vast multiplicity of things that get in the way of my NI structure. And because sensory reality can seem so chaotic and unpredictable, it just reinforces this dynamic of the INFJ needing to approach it through some unifying pattern or structure. This is the single lens or concept that I use to make sense of different sensory realities. So I would say that those are the crucial differences between these two types, but there are a few interesting differences in how the animal stack configurations play out in INFPs and in INFJs. 75% of the INFPs out there are going to be savior consume, while only 25% of the INFJ variants are going to be savior consume. And then flip that around, 75% of the INFJs out there are going to be savior blast, while only 25% of the INFPs will be savior blast. And those INFPs who are savior blast are actually going to have to be, by the way the math and the logic works out, lead sleep. And then on to the energy animals. Basically 75% of INFPs will prefer sleep as a savior, while 25% of them will prefer play. For more information on these sorts of distinctions, please check out my ENTP and INFJ comparison video, where I explain a little bit better this idea of the animal stack configurations. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that it helped you get on the right track if you're trying to figure out what your personality type is, or maybe the type of friend, family member, coworker, whatever. You get the point. Let me know if there are any compare and contrast pairings that you guys would especially like to see, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.